Welcome back to the Lanterne Rouge cycling podcast for the final stage of Tour de Suisse, Tour of Slovenia, Route d'Occitanie, and unfortunately, Baloise, the Belgium Tour, is still ongoing. But today we'll focus on the TT at Tour de Suisse, which actually has a lot of more stuff, I think, to dive into that's relevant for the Tour de France, relevant to future races than a lot of this race. It was a 25.6 kilometer TT in Liechtenstein around Vaduz. A little bit hilly, particularly the second half. First half was pretty flat up to the intermediate, and it'd still be like a 52, 53k an hour average TT. We had Fulsang. He dropped out of the leader's jersey. Could he overtake Igita, go third to second? Igita, would he keep the podium? Would he keep second? And would Thomas, I'm almost preempting it, would Thomas just not fall over pretty much and take the GC here? And he did more than that, to be honest. And you know how we do things. The results, winning the stage, Remco Evenepoel, the only rider to average over 54 with a time of 28.26, beat not Stefan Kung, Geraint Thomas 3 seconds behind. And if he'd been out of GC, that could have made the difference. Kung third on 10, Martinez fourth on 28, Jungels fifth on 33, Schachmann, Gross-Schartner, the Bora Hansgrohe top 10 duo, 39.55, Paulus 8th on 59, but he had a mechanical in the last K. He would have come 4th or 5th, and Fulsang 9th, Van Baal 10th, Gita on 117, keeps second over Igita. Thomas wins GC. So, yeah, I mean, the Thomas one stands out to me more than even Remco winning, Benji, because it was always a toss-up between Remco and Kung.
Yes, certainly. Pre-race, that was the set rivalry for today's race. And to see that Thomas can compete with those two riders here means quite a bit, I'd say, for his time trial form, definitely. And especially also for Remco, I think this might be a positive ending to a Tour de Suisse that might not have gone exactly how we wanted it to be initially. When it comes to Kung, like, his Tour de Suisse until yesterday went perfectly for him. And to have a time trial where he ends third is perhaps a bit disappointing for a man that might want to focus on trying to get a time trial at the Tour de France after getting second in loads of them in the past. But like the combination of those three, it affects their thoughts on the last week, I would say, what happened today. I think Thomas can be relatively happy with this week. He won the Tour de Suisse. He ended up having a very good time trial, above expectations 100% when it comes to the time trial. If you see Thomas in the general scope of this Tour de Suisse, with the level of climbing he did, with the level of time trialing he did, what position do you think he can compete for at the Tour de France?
Second or third. I think winning is tough because there's two Slovenians there. There's Jonas there. There's maybe back from COVID, Vlasov there. O'Connor's a better climber. But second and third is possible. You need one of the Slovenians can have a mechanical or crash out. It's possible. It's unfortunate. Jonas, the same thing can happen to him. Or you have Jumbo Visma burn one of their two leaders completely for the other, and they maybe to win or whatever. I wouldn't have said this last year. If you gave me last year's TDF parcours and said, could Thomas win? I'd say no. But we have a 40-kilometer finishing TT. We have basically a Northern Classics first week, except for Longwy, with cobble stage, with tricky Calais crosswind stages, Denmark prologue. And so I think, because who are we really thinking, Benji? I'm assuming for him to come third, Jonas or Roglic need to go, one of them, and he then needs to beat O'Connor and Vlasov. And that's why I think he can. There's a world he can.
I think so as well. Vlasov, we don't know his longer climb abilities at the moment. In the Tour de Suisse, we were hoping to find that out, but he never got to the mountains where we could find that out. And we don't know if that is still the same situation as last year in the Giro, for example, or because like in the past, that Mont Ventoux challenge he did well at ages ago, is such climbing still valid for Vlasov in 2022? For me, it isn't. We need to figure out what his current level on those climbs are, and to see whether that's sustainable throughout the Tour de France, to see whether Thomas is sustainable during that Tour de France, all that kind of stuff is something we'll find out in the race itself. And like you said, we've got other candidates like O'Connor. Will he keep that up the same way he did in the Dauphiné, for example? And I'd like to see them go for that P3 to 5 is what I would see as the goal for Thomas, a second position if a Slovenian really bottles something or has bad luck or something like you mentioned. But should they put their entire team behind a P3 to 5? Because we're not used to that when it comes to Ineos, you know? Or do you think that they'll also focus on stage wins next to that?
Well, they got Ghana. It all depends on the first week. So they have Ghana go for prologue win and yellow. So that's someone already going for stages. And I think if he takes yellow in that stage, that takes a lot of the pressure off and they can focus on GC. That also ensures their car is high up in the bunch for the tricky Danish stages, Calais and Arenberg, if he stays up there on GC. So I think the plan for them is simple. Full send first week, reevaluate where you are at the first rest day. If Thomas is on the same time or he's got a good gap on O'Connor and Vlasov, I think you have, like the Tour de France podium. Okay, I know this isn't Sky was, win or bust, but I think you got to commit to a guy for Tour de France GC podium. I think you can still do things, Benji, where I don't think you have to choose so much. Like like Verona and the Dauphiné. Get Van Baalen the break on a medium mountain stage. Maybe Thomas struggles, you drop him back. Maybe Thomas attacks, you drop him back. Maybe nothing happens and he can sit in and he can go for the stage. I think you can play it that way, but I think they full send first week, see where he is. If he's completely out of GC, he's in 6th or 7th already and he's got Alps to come, and then I think you got to go for stages. But also, and we should mention, one of the notes from this TT, why I said it was relevant for the future, was the new Pinarello Bolide. I'll wait for the engineers and the experts, which neither of us are, on sort of bike tech to really dig into this TT, and Pinarello haven't really released any marketing materials on it because it's a prototype. It looked like a New York hipsters fixie with they've got the sketcher on it and it's all white. It looked fucked up, but it was fucked up fast. So that's all that matters. It's a disc brake one, because on a dry day on a straight TT course, you obviously need disc brakes, even though Ghana maybe won the world chance because he had a rim brake TT bike over Wout van Aert. But that aside, it was fucking fast, as I've said 3 times now. Danny Martinez, Benji, 3rd in T1 to the finish. That has to be encouraging. Maybe he's not sick. Maybe he's not in bad form. Maybe he had a hard altitude camp and he's coming into shape for 2nd and 3rd week TDF.
Definitely possible, but 2nd and 3rd week TDF, then you already have to be in relatively good form on stage 11, because that's when the big Alp stages come, and that's where I'd expect a Martinez with high altitude history to be able to shine on those stages as well. So I'd hope that he's got that good form by week 2 then, as in stage 11, basically the start of that. But when it comes to Martinez, it's similar towards Remco, it's like he disappointed in the stages that we were hoping they'd shine in, and then towards this end of this Tour de Suisse, it's a time trial that really shows it. But the thing with Remco is he's got time until the Vuelta. Martinez has less time to the Tour, and it could indeed be that altitude training that impacted the initial days of this Tour de Suisse, because he got better over time during the race as well. So towards the end, he got better, and this time trial is certainly a crowning achievement, whatever you can call it, on this Tour de Suisse, better than the previous stages when it comes to Martinez. But is there a way or like a planet on which that you see Thomas's position as leader now benefiting Danny Martinez in the Tour?
Of course, it's like Bernal Thomas 2019 TDF. That was the format. And I know that's a different era, but in terms of, let's say, we're now going for podium for Ineos, they have the 2 cards to play. I do think Martinez' form, not just in the TT, but yesterday, was understated. If you want to go to lanternerouge.com.au, read Carlos' article, the watts yesterday were more than we thought from the eye test. In that heat, they actually did, like Thomas, if you adjust it for the hot conditions, Thomas did peak watts. And peak watts from Thomas isn't enough to contest with the Slovenians on a mountaintop finish, but cycling is not just about mountaintop finishes and watts. But I'm saying Martinez pulled for 5 kilometers. If he was riding for his own GC yesterday, I think he would have been doing 6.05 for 35, which is coming into really good shape. So I don't know, I think they're going to want to do a 2-liter strategy. Yates, Benji, would you even take, where does Yates fit into you? He doesn't really fit into their plan to me unless he's happy to be a mountain domestique.
But Adam Yates, when it comes to mountain domestique, and it feels a bit odd because I'd argue that there's other riders in that team that I'd much rather have as a mountain domestique, but might not be as good in their peak climbing. For example, a Castro Viejo character
Or
that's such a
Carlos,
yeah, Carlos Rodriguez as well, a good rider that
Bernard
the problem with
2018.
true,
That's
that's
him,
very
right?
true. Yeah, you're right. You're right in that aspect. And Carlos is also pretty decent when it comes to the time trolling, so he can also keep that same wattage up on the climb, try and train the rider forward and so forth, but also could play a role in other stages. I think that in chaotic hilly stages, like we saw him good at Strade, for example, he could also play a role there. But I don't know, when it comes to Adam Yates, I feel like he's less useful as a domestique than some of the other options they have, knowing that the first week is going to be so chaotic. And when it comes to GC, I also fear for Adam Yates in that first week.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. Like, he can do great top end performances, but a mountain domestique, you want him day in, day out to be able to do consistent Castro sort of stuff, or a little bit better than that. But we'll get onto Remco in a second. We've kind of ignored Remco. But before, I'll mention our show partner, Zwift. One of the most engaging parts of Zwift is the social aspect, whether that's group rides, meetups, or group workouts. And things are getting even more social with LRCP, with the LRCP Zwift Club. Join up at the link down below to keep up to date with LRCP Zwift rides, or to hop on with myself and Benji when we're on the bike, particularly during the upcoming Tour de France, and fancy a bit of company. You can access the LRCP Zwift Club through the link down below. And if you haven't joined up to Zwift yet, you can get a free 7-day trial. But yeah, Remco wins the TT, Benji. Unlike Ineos, I feel like we've learned nothing. Like, he wins a TT, not surprised. Like, I picked Kung, but I'm not surprised he won. He did very consistent pacing, and I guess he just goes back to preparing for the Vuelta now. And I think the same question marks that hung over him before the Swiss still will remain before the Vuelta.
Exactly. And that's something that I would have hoped would have been gone by now for him as well, because it must not be a positive thing for your preparation that you're always having these doubts on whether you can actually pull it off in World Tour competition, in a World Tour race, because to me it seems like that's probably not the reason. It's not because, okay, it's pro race versus a World Tour race in level, or is it because the races are harder from the start in World Tour races that it might inflict a
I don't
more
think that's
difficult
it.
ending? Okay.
Generally speaking, if you look at the aggregate watts, of course, that
Mhm.
will be true. But when comparing Swiss and Norway, in case people didn't watch, they had crosswinds and heavy splits and Ineos action almost every stage, including before mountains. They were not just walking up to the base of climbs. Guys were doing 5.8 for 20 minutes in mixed terrain, not just uphill, to stay in Group 1. So that wasn't a cakewalk. And at Swiss, you look at that first mountain stage, that was slow. I think the difference was the temperature, not the fact that one was World Tour Pro, and maybe his shape is just, well, I mean, I was about to say his shape's terrible, but like, he won a TT, so his shape can't be that bad. Like, maybe it was temperature, and the extra hours in the saddle in the heat was what really cooked him.
Possibly. But when it comes to Norway, I've also got the question then, like, could it also be a benefit for this man that there's crosswind in the stage and so forth, because it affects him perhaps less than a pure climber, or not necessarily?
Nah, I don't know. It definitely affected someone like Chavez. It definitely affected him, but I just want to make the point that dot pro races are not necessarily, they're not all the same. Valenciana and Tour of Slovenia are both dot pro races. They are not the same in difficulty to come top 5 this year. So you have to actually look at how they were raced. But yeah, great result from him. Kung, I think, will be a little bit disappointed. He actually finishes 5th in GC, 15 seconds behind Paulus, perhaps with a bit of help from Reichenbach and Pino. He would have finished 4th. Paulus was very disappointed after that mechanical, but it didn't matter. He didn't fall down into 5th, and I don't think he didn't lose a minute or 56 seconds on Full Sang, so he
Yeah.
wasn't jumping into 3rd. Anyway, Full Sang Benji, like, you look at his position, and again, I'm not an expert, but compared to the other guys, the gap between his hands and head in normal TT position is absolutely huge. And maybe that's also a problem, because I think he's in that unfortunate range of height where, he's 181, he's not 186 like Sivakov. He loses second by 4 seconds. And that is a difference in terms of points, because everything has to be reduced to points in 75 UCI points. But he still takes 325, but that's a difference in equipment. If you swap those two, if you have Fulsang on the Bora setup and Agita on the Israel setup, he finishes second.
Yeah, probably. And also next to that, this is also not like the amount of hours you spend in wind tunnels and so forth to like prep
All
your
of that.
position itself next to the equipment. But in addition to that, is that a consequence of Fulsang not necessarily having had the goal of doing Tour de France GC at the start of the year and now being placed in that position perhaps to try and gain as many points at the end?
I mean, no, I think he was always going for 1 week GCs. I think that's why
Okay.
they signed him. And Liège, Lombardia. I think like 1 week GCs, maybe not the Tour, but I think Froome was the Tour man. But yeah, just
Yeah.
something to note there. And Agita, I would say, did a pretty good in terms of splits. Agita was 20th at T1. T1 to finish was 9th. He finished really strong. Thomas, his pacing strategy, 3rd at T1, 1st at T1 to finish. Martinez, 8th and 3rd. Kung faded like he did in World Champs, 1st, then 5th. So Kung just, his watts dropped off completely, just 3-4 kilometers a little bit too long, or maybe he just wasn't in European shape. But that's all from Swiss. Thomas Benji, who struggled hard negotiations with Ineos to get the extension, wins Romandy last year, wins Swiss this year, and is at least co-leader with Martinez going into the Tour. And he's looking really good. So I think that's good. Good for me. It's just like it's just not good if Ineos if they had all their team shit for the Tour. That's just like I don't want to just see Pog against Jumbo.
Yeah, that's true. It's definitely adding something when it comes to the GC battle, although I would have been intrigued to see what they would have done if that would have happened in terms of like, would they send Hayter, Pitcock, all those like stage hunters to
Sheffield.
that? Magnus Sheffield, for example, might
The
be a bit too young to
GC.
send to the
Him
tour
and
at the
Plough.
age of 19 still.
Nah, two grand tours. You know how it is.
Okay, it is. But like, also when it comes to Thomas, like last year we were saying, oh, Ineos is going to these Mickey Mouse races and cleaning it up like that because they're doing it with Dennis, Thomas, and so forth with Board. Do we feel like that's the case then again? Because again, it's not against the Slovenians. Is that taking away from the value of it?
I mean, yeah, it's Swiss this week was not the best World Tour race. Neither was Romandy. Neither was Catalonia. But like, it's not Paris, not Dauphiné, not Tirreno. But you can only beat who's up against you. And yesterday was a good performance, watts-wise, from Thomas, from Agita. So yeah, I don't know. We'll see at the Tour. That's one of the big problems for cycling, Benji, which is an off-season discussion point, which is it is not good for the sport that Pogacar and Roglic compete against each other maybe once a year if one of them doesn't do the Vuelta. Like, that is ridiculous in World Tour stage racing for the spectacle. But that was Swiss. Very, very hot conditions. COVID disrupted the race, but they got through eventually. Sagan also tested positive for COVID. I forgot to mention that at the top of the show. It's like the 3rd or 4th time I think he's had COVID, which is a shame. How that affects his Tour de France, I'm not sure, but yeah, just a shame, I guess, for their green jersey battle. I was keen to see how he went. At Slovenia, I'll wrap it up quickly because, again, it was the same rinse and repeat. They had a 2K 9% climb near the finish. Pogacar attacked at the base, dropped Micah. He couldn't drop Moric, actually. I was kind of surprised. I think he was trying, Benji. He was trying multiple surges, and it was steep. He couldn't drop Moric. On that climb, I'm trying to read something into this for the Tour. Give me something,
Yeah,
Benji.
you're trying to read something into it, but it's like he dropped Mohoric easily the last 2 times he attacked in this Tour de Slovenia. So I feel like, I don't know, I won't read too much into it. I won't do this. They go over the top basically with 3 riders. Mezgec is the 4th rider that's trying to like endlessly follow and close the gap towards those 3, towards Mohoric, Pogacar, and then Micah, who came back towards the end of the climb and so forth. And those 3 were ahead after that climb. And in that flat finish, it was intriguing to me that at a certain point, the race director comes towards the front with the car, and Mohoric literally sees that and is like, let me just get into the back of that car and like follow that car for like 10 seconds straight. And Mezgec and Emil like behind, like, come on, guys, I don't get a car.
Was getting a bit too close. They were like, we got to make sure Pog goes to the finish here. And that's what happened. Michael led out the sprint. Pogacar nearly stuffed it. He did. Like, he was he was laying off Mohoric a lot. Mohoric saw, and this is not like a 2-up sprint where you remember E3 Harelbeke with Kwiatkowski and Sagan, when Kwiatkowski lays off and then gets a run into the slipstream with the guy leading him out. Different. Mike is leading it out here. Mohoric sees it, and he ducks to the other side and then goes in front of Micah. So he shut his slipstream off. So now Pog is actually having a sprint with no one slipstream, gets back into Mohoric slipstream, and just beats him in the finish. So, good sprint from Pogacar. I'm sure people will be calling him for Flesh for Lone win next year and maybe the green jersey this year at the Tour based on this. But yeah, he wins Tour of Slovenia, wins another stage, and a good week for him. Not really much more to say about it. Route d'Occitanie, Ineos diced it up in crosswinds, reduced the group, paced with Total. Total had full confidence in Bonifacio. Even Carlos Rodriguez did a lead out at the finish, but they didn't drop Mike Woods or Valverde, who were all still there on GC, so there weren't really any top 6 GC changes. Viviani starts this sprint on the left-hand side after a good lead out, I think, from Kim Hajduk. It was Hajduk, yes, and Viviani had no snap, Benji. He was bad in this sprint. I think, who was he sprinting against? Moschetti for Trek and Cantor. He ended up coming fourth from a really good position, and Bonifacio, and he opened up the inside to Bonifacio, who dive bombed. This is why, what's he getting paid? To hit that gap in a 2-1 stage. That's why sprinters are just built different. He hits an impossible gap to win in the last 20 meters. But yeah, any insights from this? Mike Woods takes GC, good points. Carlos Rodriguez, all right. Viviani, what do you see next for him?
I've got no clue what to expect from Viviani, really. I think that he's just going to ride for Ineos the next 2 years and then do the Paris Olympics, try and do something there. I'm pretty sure the main focus will probably be Trek for him, although I don't expect there to be too many hills in the actual road race, so he might also try there. Although, what Italian sprinter would you put ahead? Probably, would you put Nizzolo ahead of Viviani or not, depending on the parkour, probably?
Nizzolo, Moschetti, by then, anyone. Is Bonifacio French or he's Italian?
He's Italian.
He tries for a French team. Well, I'd put the 2 guys who just beat him in the sprint, Bonifacio and Moschetti, ahead of him. And I think he's Ganna's friend and he's doing the track. But that was Occitanie, 2-1 race. Ineos tried, but it didn't work in the crosswinds for GC. And it was kind of like Provence, but Viviani did not have that legs of that Provence stage where he won with Luke Rowe leading him out. But 125 points for Woods. That's quick maths, 450 today for Israel. They will be very, very happy with that. And Balwaza, unfortunately, they'll be giving a bit back because Lotto Soudal are charging from there. Otherwise, Tour de Suisse women started yesterday. Not a World Tour race. It's a .pro. We couldn't cover it last night because it started at 7:30 in the evening. And it was a small group sprint won by Lucinda Brand with good teamwork. They had Balsamo there. She won the reduced bunch. She won the bunch sprint behind. And then today the TT was won. It was also in Vaduz in Liechtenstein by 1, 2, 3 for Bex. So the Bex women's team is absolutely flying. Faulkner winning. She won by over a minute in a 48.3 average. So, TDF, Faulkner might be a sneaky top 5 GC.
The thing for me is I would have said yes if there was a time trial. But without a time trial, I'm not sure the climbing will be good enough for a top 5. It will be close. I think top 10 is something I'd be more comfortable saying personally.
And now Balwaza Belgium Tour is wrapped up, as we said. Yesterday, Quinten Hermans won and Mauro Schmidt is able to win GC there ahead of Tim Wellens, Hermans third. So pretty big win for Schmidt. I want to ask you now, after that result, Benji, he's a great rider for their Tour squad.
Yes, certainly. I think for the Tour, he's ridden
good
the Giro.
In Ardennes and sort of classic stuff for the first week.
I know you want to send every single kid to 17 Grand Tours per season.
He did Giro, so he should do Tour. He's carrying his form well.
When it comes to Mauro Schmidt, he's so versatile, He can relatively climb, he can be supportive on the climbs, he can do very well when it comes to the punchy terrain. On the cobble terrain, I trust him to stay relatively afloat. because Montalcino will likely translate to being decent on cobbles, is how my mind works. But next to that, like, I want to add when it comes to this final stage of today that there was an intermediate sprint, the Golden Kilometer, and we saw a strategy by Quickstep where Wellens and Schmidt were going to fight for the bonus seconds, as they would actually have an influence on who wins this race. And Lampard straight up put his elbow ahead of Wellens, then basically started braking ahead of Wellens to make sure Wellens could not sprint against Schmidt at the Golden Kilometer. And like, depending on, I don't think you've had the time to check in and Sifov and me to really judge whether it should be penalized or not. But if it should be penalized, Lampard would get a punishment, Schmidt would not, and Schmidt would still get the second. So it feels like this sport of cycling is a team sport in everything except for the punishments.
Well, it's like Mercu at the intermediate sprints last year. This is the Mercu strat. It's if he deviates, he's going to get penalized. I think we need to hold a moment's silence, Benji. Jakobsen won the stage out of Phillips and Gerben Thijssen. I think Cav to the Tour is dead. I'm calling it. I think Cav to the Tour is dead, unfortunately. Like, listen, I want Cav there, like, for the views. I don't think... Like Jakobsen's comeback story is great, but Cav is, at least in the English-speaking media world, bigger name. But I think it's dead. Jakobsen's looking too sharp. He needed this, though. If he'd sucked in the sprints, it might have been tighter, but I don't see Cav going now at all.
And what should the boys at Bora do? Should they start having Danny van Poppel as their main sprinter?
I mean... Gerben Thijssen beating Bennett coming fourth. It's going to be a sunk cost fallacy. If you switch the salaries around, there's no argument, right? But that's just not how these things work. So yep. I don't know, maybe Bennett's coming into shape. We've seen Hindley go from one level to, fifth on Carpena in a group G3 to dropping Carapaz on Fedaya. So maybe Bennett can do that in the Tour. I don't know. I'm too scared to judge the Bora performance management anymore. I'm too scared. I've had my fingers burned too much. Like, I won't even count Vlasov out. They'll literally be like, he's COVID positive. I'm like, that man could win the Tour because I'm not getting burnt again. But yeah, you're right. In all seriousness, it's not good because it's the whole of year thing. And what do you think they should do? You're the performance manager. You're the DS or manager. What do you say?
Okay, I'm the performance manager, so I'm depending on Vlasov's form, the focus on a podium is realistic in my opinion when it comes to the team. I think they can achieve that if the situation turns out relatively okay on the mountains and so forth. When it comes to the rest of the team, I think that they're likely going to end up with Mullen, Archbold, Van Poppel as the leadouts for Bennett, but should they? I think... Can Van Poppel do well on Longwy, or is it too difficult?
Nah, too hard. But he can do well on the other stages. Like, he's legit fast. I think on the other say it's they're messy in Denmark and northern in Calais and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Like, who's to say he can't do well? I don't know. But then Jakobsen will still be there. What about if Vlasov's... The big question is, do you pull Agita out of his schedule? He's supposed to go to Polonia Vuelta. And you send Agita as your GC man if Vlasov's not right.
Ooh.
It doesn't suit him,
Not sure about that. Yeah, I think the Vuelta's parkour really kind of fits him outside of the time trials. When it comes to like the Mini Puerto stages. Fly. Oh, that's true. You're right. You're right there.
It's tough.
I don't think they should change that last minute in that sense. Grosjean and Schachmann will probably be at the Tour. I think that should be a focus for support for Vlasov if Vlasov is indeed there. And otherwise, otherwise stage wins if he's not. Conrad, same story. So I think it's a pretty decent team, actually. Grosjean and Schachmann being top 10 at Tour de Suisse as well. Conrad being relatively okay as a rider as well. So I think it's a damn solid squad they've got as well there. But we're diving into the TDF preview, mate. We can't spoil everything before the next one, okay?
Well, it'll change by the time we record. By the way, that'll be in just under a week. Hopefully there'll be more news, I'm sure, in the coming week. riders' conditions, hopefully recovery from COVID, etc. But that's all from us. Been a big block of racing, couple of days off now before we get stuck back into it. Thanks very much for your support. If you have enjoyed the LRCP episodes recently, make sure to give us a review or a rating on podcast players or subscribe on YouTube if you haven't already. But thanks to you all. Benji and I are going to have a little rest. Ciao.